The morning sun cast long shadows across Westfield University's Emerald Quad as Dean Morrison adjusted his microphone for the third time. Graduation day should have been perfect. Blue skis, proud families, the usual pomp and circumstance. Instead, he found himself squinting at the peculiar figure in the front row of graduates. While her classmates wore regulation caps and gowns with polished dress shoes, Aviana Viper, Reyes, sat with her legs crossed, desert combat boots visible beneath her academic regalia. The whispers started immediately. Is she serious? Those boots are so inappropriate. Someone should tell her this isn't basic training. But Aviana didn't flinch. Her dark eyes remained fixed on the horizon beyond the ceremonial stage, watching something the others couldn't see. Her fingers unconsciously traced the faded scar along her left temple, a souvenir from Kandahar that most people mistook for a childhood accident. Dean Morrison cleared his throat and began his rehearsed speech about bright futures and limitless possibilities. The crowd of 2,847 graduates and their families settled into the familiar rhythm of academic ceremony. Parents raised phones to capture the moment their children officially became adults. But Aviana's attention was elsewhere, her trained ear picking up a sound that didn't belong. It started as a whisper in the distance, a rhythmic thumping that civilians would dismiss as construction noise or highway traffic. But Aviana knew better. She'd heard that sound 1,000 times over Afghanistan's mountains and Iraq's deserts, the distinctive wop-wop-wop of twin rotors cutting through air. Her pulse quickened as the sound grew stronger, more defined. The first person to notice was little Emma Chen, a professor's daughter sitting in the family section. She tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed skyward. "Mommy, what's that noise?" Others began to look up, shielding their eyes against the sun, confused murmurs rippling through the crowd. Dean Morrison paused mid-sentence about embracing tomorrow's challenges as the rhythmic thumping became unmistakable. A collective gasp rose from the assembled crowd as a massive CH-47 Chinook helicopter crested the tree line, its twin rotors creating a thunderous symphony that drowned out all other sound. The aircraft descended with military precision, its olive-drab hull gleaming in the morning light. Dust and debris swirled across the carefully manicured quad as the Chinook touched down 50 yards behind the podium, its engines winding down to an idle. The graduation ceremony had just become something else entirely. Every eye in the crowd turned to the helicopter, then slowly, inevitably, back to the young woman in combat boots who sat perfectly still, as if she'd been expecting this moment all along. Aviana Viper, Reyes finally smiled. The helicopter's rear ramp began to lower with hydraulic precision, revealing figures in desert camouflage who moved with the controlled urgency of soldiers on a mission. But this wasn't Afghanistan or Iraq. This was suburban Connecticut, and nobody understood why a military transport helicopter had just landed at their college graduation. Except for one person who wore boots instead of heels, and whose past was about to collide with everyone's present in ways they never could have imagined. The distinguished gentleman who emerged from the Chinook wore the silver eagles of a full colonel, his uniform immaculate despite the helicopter ride. Colonel Marcus Webb had flown across 3 time zones to be here, carrying orders that would change everything. His weathered face, marked by 28 years of service, scanned the crowd until his eyes found the one person he'd come to see. As he strode across the quad with purposeful steps, Webb remembered the last time he'd seen Lieutenant Aviana Reyes. She'd been lying in a field hospital in Bagram, her Apache helicopter a twisted wreck in the Afghan mountains, her crew chief dead, and her co-pilot fighting for his life. The doctors said she'd never fly again. The psychologist said she'd never recover from the trauma. They were wrong on both counts. The crowd watched in stunned silence as this decorated officer approached their makeshift graduation ceremony. Parents pulled their children closer. Faculty members exchanged bewildered glances. The local news crew, which had come to film feel-good graduation footage, scrambled to reposition their cameras. Dean Morrison, a man more comfortable with budget meetings than military protocol, stepped forward uncertainly. "Excuse me, sir, but this is a private ceremony. If you could please. Colonel Webb raised a hand, not rudely, but with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Dr. Morrison, I apologize for the interruption. I'm Colonel Marcus Webb, United States Army. I need to speak with one of your graduates. The dean's confusion deepened. I'm sorry, but we're in the middle of. Lieutenant Reyes, Webb called out, his voice carrying across the quad despite the helicopter's idling rotors. I need you to come with me. Every head turned toward Aviana, who remained seated, her expression unreadable. The whispers intensified. Lieutenant, she's in the military. Those boots suddenly make sense. But Aviana didn't move. She couldn't, because the last time someone had called her lieutenant, she'd been pulling her dying crew chief from burning wreckage while Taliban rounds cracked past her head. There's been a situation, Webb continued, stepping closer. We need our best pilot. Aviana finally stood, her movements deliberate and controlled. The academic gown fell awkwardly around her combat boots, a jarring juxtaposition of civilian achievement and military readiness. With all due respect, Colonel, I'm retired, medically discharged. The flight surgeons were very clear about that. Webb's expression softened, revealing a glimpse of the man behind the rank. The medical review board reconvened last month. You've been cleared for active duty, all restrictions lifted. He paused, letting the words sink in. We need you, Viper. The use of her call sign hit like a physical blow. Viper. The name she'd earned in the skis over Helmand Province, threading Apache helicopters through mountain passes that other pilots wouldn't dare attempt. The name that died with Sergeant Rodriguez and nearly killed Captain Martinez when their bird went down. Webb reached into his pocket and produced a manila envelope, official seals intact. These are your orders, Lieutenant. Priority 1. No one else can fly this mission. Aviana stared at the envelope as if it contained explosives. Around her, 2,846 other graduates waited to receive diplomas and begin normal lives. Jobs in accounting firms, medical residencies, graduate programs. Simple, predictable futures that didn't involve dodging surface-to-air missiles or making split-second decisions that determined who lived and died. But the envelope represented something different. It represented flying again. It represented the sky. The silence stretched until little Emma Chen's voice cut through the tension. Are you a real soldier? The question came from pure childhood curiosity, innocent and direct in the way that only children manage. Aviana looked down at the girl, then back at Colonel Webb, then at the Chinook helicopter idling behind the podium like some mechanical angel of war. The answer to Emma's question was more complicated than anyone could understand. She'd been a soldier. She'd been broken. She'd been dismissed. And now, apparently, she was needed again. I was, Aviana said quietly, then corrected herself. I am. Webb extended the envelope once more. The mission briefing is classified, but I can tell you this. You're the only pilot with the specific skill set we need. No one else has your experience with low-altitude precision flying in hostile territory. The crowd watched this exchange like spectators at a tennis match, their heads turning between the colonel and the young woman whose graduation had just become a military recruitment. Dean Morrison looked as if he might faint. The news crew captured every moment, already imagining the headlines. Combat veteran recruited at college graduation, or from cap and gown to cockpit. Aviana's mother, Maria Reyes, sat in the family section with tears streaming down her face. She'd already lost her daughter once to the military, to trauma, nightmares, and a medical discharge that took months to process. She'd watched Aviana struggle through rehabilitation, therapy, and civilian college, slowly rebuilding herself piece by piece. And now this colonel wanted to take her away again. But Maria also saw something else in her daughter's eyes. For the first time in 2 years, Aviana looked truly alive. What's the timeline? Aviana asked, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. We need to be airborne in 90 minutes. Full mission briefing en route. Webb glanced at his watch, a gesture that made the urgency real. I know this isn't ideal timing, but situations don't wait for convenient moments. Aviana nodded slowly, understanding flooding her features. She'd been recalled to active duty, which meant someone, somewhere, needed the specific combination of skills that made her Viper. It meant threading aircraft through impossible spaces, making precision strikes in urban environments, or executing rescue operations that conventional pilots couldn't handle. It meant being needed again. She took the envelope with steady hands, breaking the wax seal with practiced efficiency. The orders were brief but comprehensive. Report immediately to Colonel Marcus Webb for classified mission assignment. All previous medical restrictions rescinded by order of Joint Chiefs of Staff. Duration, indefinite. The weight of those words settled over the graduation ceremony like morning fog. Indefinite meant this wasn't a single mission or short-term assignment. This was a return to military life, complete and uncompromising. Dean Morrison finally found his voice. "Ms. Reyes, you don't have to do this. You have rights as a civilian. You've earned your degree. You have job offers waiting." "Doctor," Colonel Webb interrupted gently, "Lieutenant Reyes has been recalled to active duty under federal authority. This isn't a recruitment, it's orders." The distinction hit everyone simultaneously. This wasn't a request or an opportunity. This was military service calling in its claim on one of its own. Aviana's civilian life, her college degree, her carefully planned future, all of it suddenly secondary to whatever crisis required her immediate attention. Aviana looked around the graduation ceremony one final time. Her classmates stared with mixtures of awe, confusion, and sympathy. Some looked envious, imagining military service as adventure and heroism. Others appeared horrified, recognizing the sacrifice inherent in sudden deployment. Her eyes found her mother's face in the crowd. Maria Reyes mouthed the words, "I love you," and nodded once, a mother's blessing disguised as resignation. They both knew this moment had been inevitable. You could take the pilot out of the cockpit, but you couldn't take the sky out of the pilot's heart. "Viper," Colonel Webb prompted gently, "we need to move." Aviana straightened her shoulders, military bearing replacing civilian posture in an instant. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable, like watching someone remember their true nature after a long period of forgetting. "Yes, sir," she replied, the words feeling both foreign and familiar. "I'm ready." But as she started toward the helicopter, she paused and looked back at the crowd of graduates. Her classmates who would receive their diplomas and begin predictable careers. Her professors who had guided her through literature courses and psychology seminars. The dean who had advocated for her scholarship despite her unconventional background. "Dr. Morrison," she called out, her voice carrying across the quad. "Could you hold my diploma? I'll be back for graduation eventually." The dean nodded wordlessly, understanding that eventually might mean months or years, depending on whatever classified situation demanded her immediate attention. Some graduations end with students walking across stages to receive diplomas and shake hands with administrators. Others end with combat veterans boarding military helicopters while their families watch from folding chairs. Aviana pulled off her graduation cap and gown, revealing the dress uniform she'd worn underneath, Air Force blue with silver wings pinned above her left breast pocket. The crowd gasped at this revelation. She hadn't just worn combat boots to graduation as some fashion statement or act of rebellion. She'd come prepared for exactly this moment. Colonel Webb smiled approvingly. "You knew." "I hoped," she corrected, walking toward the Chinook with measured steps. "I've been cleared for flight status for 3 weeks. I was waiting for orders." The confession recontextualized everything. Her calm demeanor when the helicopter arrived. Her lack of surprise at Colonel Webb's appearance. Her readiness to abandon civilian life at a moment's notice. She'd been preparing for this recall to active duty while completing her final semester, maintaining the facade of normal college life while internally preparing for military service. As they approached the helicopter, Webb handed her a flight bag that contained everything she'd need. Updated identification, mission-specific equipment, and personal items retrieved from her former base housing. Someone had packed her life while she was attending graduation, knowing she'd need these things the moment she accepted her orders. The efficiency was both impressive and unsettling. The military had orchestrated this recall with precision timing, ensuring she could complete her degree before resuming active duty. It was a gesture of respect for her sacrifice and a demonstration of institutional power. Aviana paused at the helicopter's ramp and looked back one final time. The graduation ceremony had devolved into chaos, parents demanding explanations, students recording videos with their phones, faculty members debating protocol for unprecedented situations. But in the middle of it all, little Emma Chen waved enthusiastically, apparently delighted by the unexpected excitement. Aviana waved back, then climbed into the Chinook's troop compartment. The interior was familiar: canvas seats, exposed wiring, the smell of aviation fuel and military efficiency. Home, in a way that civilian classrooms had never quite managed to be. As the helicopter's engines spun up to takeoff power, Colonel Webb settled into the seat across from her and opened a classified briefing folder. "The situation is in Southeast Asia," he began, his voice barely audible over the rotor noise. "Hostage rescue, high-value target, impossible insertion point." Aviana nodded, already visualizing approaches and contingencies. This was why they needed Viper, for missions that required precision flying in spaces where larger aircraft couldn't operate and conventional pilots wouldn't dare to try. The Chinook lifted off from Westfield University's quad, climbing over the Connecticut suburbs while 2,846 graduates and their families watched from below. Some would remember this as the day their graduation was interrupted by military drama. Others would recognize it as the moment they witnessed someone answer their country's call to service. But for Aviana, Viper, Reyes, it was simply the day she stopped pretending to be a civilian and remembered what it meant to fly. 36 hours later, Lieutenant Aviana Reyes sat in the cockpit of an AH-64 Apache helicopter, her hands steady on the controls as she studied the mission parameters displayed on her helmet-mounted system. The target building sat in the middle of Kuala Lumpur's densest urban district, surrounded by apartment complexes, shopping centers, and schools. Extracting hostages from this location would require flying between buildings with less than 10 feet of rotor clearance on either side. Any other pilot would have declared the mission impossible. Viper saw it as Tuesday morning. "Bloodhound Base, this is Viper 1, she transmitted, her voice calm and professional. "Beginning approach vector, all systems green." "Copy, Viper 1. You are cleared for the approach. Weather is calm, minimal wind, good hunting." Colonel Webb monitored the mission from the command center, watching helmet camera feeds and tracking data that showed Aviana's Apache threading between skyscrapers with surgical precision. 2 years of civilian life hadn't dulled her reflexes or compromised her judgment. If anything, the forced break from military service had given her perspective that made her more dangerous, not less. In the cockpit, Aviana felt the familiar rush of combat flying, the heightened awareness, the compressed time, the absolute focus that came with knowing that every decision mattered. This was what she'd missed during college classes and therapy sessions. Not the violence or danger, but the precision. The perfection of human and machine working in harmony to accomplish impossible tasks. Her co-pilot, Captain Jake "Mongoose" Morrison, watched the building walls flash past their windows with a mixture of admiration and terror. "Viper, we've got about 6 inches clearance on your side. How are you so calm?" "Because, Mongoose," she replied, adjusting their approach angle by fractions of degrees, "the helicopter doesn't care if I'm nervous. It only responds to inputs. Fear is just noise." The wisdom was earned through experience. Crashes survived, missions completed, teammates lost and saved. Aviana had learned to separate emotional responses from operational requirements, a skill that served her in civilian college classes as well as military cockpits. As they descended toward the building's roof, she could see the hostage situation unfolding through her targeting system. 3 terrorists, 4 civilian prisoners, multiple exit routes blocked by local police. The rescue team needed insertion and extraction from a space barely large enough for their rotor disc. "Bloodhound Base, Viper 1 is beginning final approach. Estimate 30 seconds to touchdown. Copy, Viper 1. Rescue team is standing by. Make it clean. Aviana smiled grimly at the instruction. Clean meant no civilian casualties, no collateral damage, no international incidents. It meant flying with a precision that left no margin for error in a situation where errors were fatal. But as she guided the Apache through its final approach, settling onto the building's roof with the delicate touch of a surgeon, Aviana realized something profound. She was exactly where she belonged. The rescue team deployed with military efficiency, their boots hitting the roof before the helicopter's wheels had fully settled. Aviana maintained hover power, ready for immediate takeoff once the hostages were secured. Through her headset, she monitored radio traffic as the team breached the building and began their approach to the terrorist position. Bloodhound 6, this is team leader. We have visual on 4 hostages, all appear unharmed. 3 tangos in defensive positions, requesting permission to engage. Team leader, you're cleared to engage. Priority is hostage safety. Aviana listened to the tactical communications while maintaining perfect hover control, her helicopter positioned for immediate extraction. This was the part of military operations that civilian life couldn't replicate. The teamwork, the shared risk, the knowledge that everyone's survival depended on everyone else's competence. Below her, the rescue unfolded with practiced efficiency. Flashbangs detonated. Automatic weapons fired in controlled bursts. Within 90 seconds, 4 terrified but unharmed civilians were being escorted to the roof by operators in full tactical gear. Viper 1, we're coming up with packages. Prepare for immediate extract. Copy, team leader. Ready for passengers. The hostages climbed into the Apache's passenger compartment with the shaky relief of people who had accepted death and been granted reprieve. 3 businessmen and 1 journalist, all slightly injured but mobile, all grateful for American military competence and helicopter precision. As Aviana lifted off from the building's roof, threading back through the urban canyon with her precious cargo, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years, complete professional satisfaction. This was what she'd been trained for, what she'd sacrificed for, what she'd almost died for. Bloodhound Base, Viper 1 is airborne with 4 packages. All packages appear stable. ETA to base is 15 minutes. Outstanding work, Viper 1. That was textbook precision flying. But as they cleared the city limits and headed toward the staging area, Captain Morrison asked the question that cut to the heart of everything. Viper, why did you come back? You had a full-ride scholarship, job offers waiting, a normal life ahead of you. Why give that up for this? Aviana considered the question as Malaysia's jungle canopy flashed beneath their aircraft. Why had she come back? The honest answer was complicated. Part duty, part addiction, part recognition that some people were designed for specific purposes. Because, she finally replied, someone has to be willing to fly the missions that other people can't, and I happen to be very good at it. The simple truth resonated through the helicopter's intercom system. Military service, at its best, was about competence applied to necessary tasks. It was about people who possessed specific skills, accepting responsibility for situations that required those skills. As they approached the base, Aviana began her landing checklist with the same methodical precision she'd applied to every phase of the mission. But she also began thinking about the larger implications of her recall to active duty. This rescue mission was just the beginning. There would be other situations, other impossible insertions, other moments when success depended on threading helicopters through spaces that shouldn't accommodate them. She was Viper again, and the sky was her domain. 6 months after the Kuala Lumpur extraction, Lieutenant Colonel Aviana Reyes, her promotion had come through after the successful hostage rescue, stood in the Pentagon briefing room, facing a conference table full of generals who needed someone to execute another impossible mission. The situation was classified at the highest levels, but the requirements were familiar. Precision flying in an urban environment, minimal civilian exposure, maximum operational security. The target is in downtown Seoul, General Patricia Hayes explained, indicating satellite imagery on the main screen. North Korean sleeper agents have taken control of a communications facility. The building is surrounded by civilian structures and sits directly beneath commercial air traffic patterns. Aviana studied the photographs with professional interest. Seoul's skyline was even more challenging than Kuala Lumpur's. Taller buildings, denser urban development, more complex airspace management. The kind of insertion that would require flying below radar coverage while avoiding civilian aircraft and maintaining positive control in a confined space. "What's the timeline?" she asked, already calculating approach vectors and contingency routes. 18 hours. The agents are threatening to broadcast classified intelligence unless their demands are met. We can't negotiate, and conventional assault would result in unacceptable civilian casualties. General Hayes paused, studying Aviana's reaction. This mission requires someone with your specific skill set, urban precision flying under combat conditions. The insertion point has been deemed impossible by 3 separate pilot assessment teams. Aviana nodded slowly. This was why she'd been recalled to active duty, not for routine missions that any competent pilot could handle, but for situations that required the specific combination of skills that made her Viper. The ability to fly helicopters through spaces that shouldn't accommodate them. "I'll need complete tactical control of the insertion," she stated. "No interference from ground commanders who don't understand flight dynamics. No second-guessing from operations centers that can't see what I'm seeing." General Hayes smiled grimly. "You'll have complete operational authority for the flight phase. Once you deliver the assault team, you extract and maintain overwatch until completion." The arrangement was unusual, a lieutenant colonel being granted tactical command over a mission involving multiple agencies and international cooperation. But unusual circumstances required unconventional command structures. Sometimes the person with the most relevant expertise needed to make the critical decisions. "Sir," Aviana continued, "I'll need Captain Morrison as my co-pilot. We've developed operational chemistry that can't be replicated with random crew assignments. Mongoose is already being briefed separately. You'll have your team." The meeting concluded with handshakes and classified documents, but as the generals filed out, General Hayes remained behind. She was a career officer who had risen through the ranks during an era when women in combat roles were controversial, and she recognized something of herself in Aviana's determined competence. "Off the record," Hayes said quietly, "how are you handling the transition back to active duty? It can't be easy going from civilian college life to high-stakes combat operations." Aviana considered the question honestly. The transition had been jarring, from literature seminars to hostage rescues, from campus protests to international incidents. But it had also felt inevitable, like returning to a language she'd temporarily forgotten how to speak. "It's what I was designed for," she replied simply. "College was interesting, but this is who I am." General Hayes nodded approvingly. "That's what I hoped you'd say, because after Seoul, we have other situations that will require your skills. The world has become more complicated in the 2 years since your medical discharge." The implication was clear. Aviana's recall to active duty wasn't temporary. She was being positioned for a career of impossible missions, urban insertions, and precision flying in situations where failure meant international consequences. As she left the Pentagon briefing room, Aviana felt the familiar mix of anticipation and professional focus that preceded challenging operations. Seoul would be different from Kuala Lumpur: tighter airspace, more complex political implications, higher stakes for mission success. But the fundamental challenge remained the same: threading military aircraft through civilian spaces with surgical precision, delivering assault teams to locations that conventional wisdom deemed unreachable. She was Viper. This was what she did. 12 hours before the Seoul insertion, Aviana sat in the operations center, reviewing weather reports and flight data, while her ground crew performed final maintenance checks on her aircraft. The AH-64 Apache had been modified with additional navigation equipment and sound dampening technology, making it capable of urban operations without excessive noise signature. Captain Morrison joined her at the planning table, bringing coffee and the grim humor that characterized military partnerships forged under pressure. "So, Viper, on a scale of 1 to impossible, how would you rate tomorrow's mission?" "About a 7, she replied, studying approach angles. "The building placement is tricky, but the weather is favorable and we have good intelligence on enemy positions." "Only a 7. You're getting soft in your old age." Aviana smiled at the familiar banter. Military humor was a coping mechanism that helped personnel process the stress of high-stakes operations. It was also a way of maintaining human connection in situations that required emotional distance. "Mongoose, you know what the real challenge is going to be." "Enlighten me." "Not the flying. The flying is just aviation. The challenge is going to be trusting that the assault team can complete their mission quickly enough for us to extract before civilian air traffic controllers notice our presence." Captain Morrison nodded seriously. Seoul's airspace was managed by civilian authorities who wouldn't be informed about their mission for security reasons. They would have approximately 8 minutes to insert the assault team, complete the operation, and extract before commercial aircraft patterns were disrupted. 8 minutes to change international relations, Morrison observed. No pressure. But as they continued their mission planning, Aviana realized something important about her return to military service. The skills were unchanged: flight training, tactical planning, crisis management under pressure. But her perspective had evolved during her civilian interlude. She understood now what they were protecting and why precision mattered. The civilians going about their daily lives in Seoul had no idea that their safety depended on military personnel willing to execute dangerous missions with perfect competence. College students attending classes, families eating dinner, business people commuting home, all of them secured by operators who functioned in the spaces between peace and war. "Mongoose," she said quietly, "remind me why we do this." Captain Morrison looked up from his navigation charts, recognizing the tone of someone grappling with larger questions. "Because someone has to, and we happen to be very good at it." The simple answer echoed her own words from months earlier, but now carried additional weight. Military service was ultimately about competent people accepting responsibility for tasks that required their specific skills. It was about being willing to operate in dangerous spaces so that other people could live in safe ones. As the final pre-mission briefing concluded and the assault team prepared their equipment, Aviana felt the familiar transformation from civilian thinking to combat focus. Personal concerns, career considerations, and philosophical questions receded into background noise. What remained was mission parameters, flight dynamics, and the immediate requirements of threading helicopters through urban environments. She was Viper. Tomorrow, she would prove once again why that call sign had been earned in the skis over Afghanistan and retained through every impossible mission since. The Seoul insertion began at 3:47 local time, with Aviana's Apache lifting off from a classified staging area 30 kilometers south of the city. Navigation was entirely by GPS and terrain-following radar, maintaining low altitude to avoid civilian air traffic controllers and North Korean surveillance systems. Bloodhound Base, Viper 1 is airborne. ETA to insertion point is 12 minutes. Copy, Viper 1. Weather is clear, minimal wind. All stations report ready. In the passenger compartment, 6 operators from Special Operations Command reviewed final mission parameters while checking weapons and communications equipment. They were professionals who had trained for urban assault scenarios, but their success depended entirely on Aviana's ability to deliver them to an impossible location. As Seoul's sprawl appeared ahead, glittering with millions of lights that marked one of Asia's most densely populated metropolitan areas, Aviana began the delicate process of threading her aircraft between commercial buildings while avoiding detection by air traffic control systems. "Mongoose, I'm seeing heavy civilian air traffic at our 12 o'clock. We need to adjust approach vector to avoid their landing patterns." "Copy. Recommend heading 270 for 3 minutes, then turn north to final approach. The modification required flying between apartment complexes with even tighter clearances, but it maintained separation from civilian aircraft that would complicate extraction procedures. Aviana guided the Apache through the urban canyon with the steady hands that had made her legendary among military aviators. Bloodhound Base, Viper 1 is beginning final approach. Visual contact with target building. Copy, Viper 1. Assault team confirms ready for deployment. The communications facility sat on the roof of a 40-story office complex, surrounded by similar buildings that formed a geometric maze of concrete and steel. The insertion point required precision flying that left no margin for error. Too high and they'd be visible to civilian observers. Too low and rotor wash would shatter windows in occupied apartments. Aviana settled the Apache onto the building's roof with the delicate touch of a surgeon, her landing gear touching down simultaneously while maintaining power for immediate takeoff. Assault team, you are cleared for deployment. Good hunting. The operators exited the aircraft with practiced efficiency, their boots hitting the rooftop before the helicopter had fully settled. Within seconds, they were breaching the communications facility while Aviana maintained hover power, ready for immediate extraction or fire support if the situation deteriorated. Through her headset, she monitored tactical communications as the team moved through the building, locating and neutralizing the North Korean agents while securing the communications equipment they had threatened to misuse. Viper 1, this is team leader. We have control of the facility. 4 tangos neutralized, no friendly casualties. Preparing for extraction in 90 seconds. Copy, team leader, standing by for passenger pickup. But as the assault team prepared to return to the roof, Aviana's threat warning system activated, indicating that North Korean military units were responding to the incursion. Surface-to-air missile batteries were coming online throughout the city, transforming their extraction into a combat flight through actively defended airspace. Bloodhound Base, Viper 1 is showing multiple SAM sites activating. Request immediate clearance for combat extraction. Viper 1, you are cleared to engage hostile targets and execute emergency extraction. Priority is team safety. The mission parameters had just changed from covert insertion to combat evacuation, but Aviana's training encompassed both scenarios. As the assault team climbed aboard her aircraft, she was already calculating escape routes that would minimize exposure to surface-to-air missiles while maintaining low altitude to avoid radar detection. Everyone strapped in, she asked over the intercom. Affirmative, Viper. Get us out of here. Aviana lifted off from the building's roof and immediately dove between skyscrapers, using Seoul's urban landscape as cover while SAM batteries swept the sky searching for her aircraft. The extraction required flying even lower than the insertion, threading through spaces that challenged the fundamental limitations of rotary wing aviation. Mongoose, I'm showing missile lock warnings from multiple directions. We need to stay in the urban canyon until we reach the extraction corridor. Copy. Navigation shows clear route for 8 more minutes, then we'll have open sky to the staging area. 8 minutes of flying between buildings, while surface-to-air missile systems tried to target her aircraft. 8 minutes of precision flying, that would determine whether the mission ended in success or international incident. But as Seoul's skyline flashed past her cockpit windows, Aviana felt the familiar calm that came with operating at the edge of human and mechanical capability. This was why she'd been recalled to active duty. This was what Viper meant. She was exactly where she belonged. The extraction from Seoul became the stuff of military legend. 7 minutes and 38 seconds of urban combat flying that redefined what was considered possible for rotary wing aircraft. Aviana threaded her Apache through spaces that shouldn't have accommodated helicopters, maintaining terrain-following flight while SAM batteries painted her aircraft with targeting radars. Viper 1, Bloodhound Base, we're showing you below minimum safe altitude for your current speed. Recommend climbing to. Negative, Bloodhound Base. Climbing will expose us to missile fire. We're maintaining current altitude until clear of urban area. The radio exchange captured the essence of Aviana's approach to impossible missions. Calculated risks based on comprehensive understanding of aviation dynamics and threat assessment. She flew lower than safety protocols recommended because higher altitude meant certain death from surface-to-air missiles. In the passenger compartment, the assault team members who had executed dozens of special operations missions found themselves impressed by flying that exceeded their previous experience of military aviation. They were accustomed to helicopter insertions and extractions, but Viper's urban flying was something different entirely. "Jesus, Viper," one operator called over the intercom. "I've never seen anyone fly like this." 20 years of practice, she replied calmly, adjusting their flight path to pass between two apartment buildings with less than 15 feet of clearance. "Aviation is just physics. If you understand the physics, you can make aircraft do things that look impossible." The philosophical explanation was delivered while executing a 90-degree turn at 120 knots altitude 50 feet above Seoul's streets, but it reflected Aviana's fundamental approach to military flying. Helicopter capabilities were limited by engineering and aerodynamics, not by conventional wisdom about what pilots were supposed to attempt. Bloodhound Base, Viper 1 is clear of urban area, climbing to normal cruise altitude. ETA to staging area is 6 minutes. Outstanding work, Viper 1. That was the most impressive combat extraction in recent memory. As they climbed to safe altitude above South Korea's countryside, Captain Morrison finally allowed himself to relax. "Viper, that was either the most professional flying I've ever witnessed or the craziest. I'm not sure which." "Probably both," Aviana admitted. "But everyone's going home and the mission objectives were achieved. That's